When you hear the word caveman, I bet a very specific image pops into your head. But what if I told you that image, that whole idea, is almost completely made up? Today, we're going to unmake that myth, and what we'll find underneath is way more interesting than the fiction.
You can almost hear it, can't you? That deep, gravelly voice. It's the sound from 1,000 different cartoons, the sound we all just instinctively think of as prehistoric. But is it?
And you can definitely picture the look, right? The lowbrow, the messy animal skin for clothes, and of course, the big club. Always with the club. That caricature is practically burned into our collective brain.
So that's the real question, isn't it? We all recognize this guy, but where did this image actually come from? And more importantly, is it based on any real science or something else entirely? The answer is pretty surprising, and it actually says a lot about us today.
It turns out this image wasn't something we discovered. It's something we invented. This brutish caricature was literally forged from a mix of some pretty biased science, a bit of political convenience, and a whole lot of pulp fiction. So let's meet the main architect of the myth, a French paleontologist named Marcel Bull. His analysis of a particular Neanderthal skeleton back in the early 1900s basically created the image of our ancient relatives that stuck around for over a century. Bull looked at these bones and described an ape-like brute, a missing link. But modern science tells a completely different and frankly a much more human story. This wasn't some primitive beast. It was an old man, and he was suffering from severe arthritis. His stooped posture wasn't a sign of being primitive. It was a symptom of being in a lot of pain.
And you can kind of see how the myth got built, layer by layer. It starts off in novels, then it gets this so-called scientific stamp of approval from Bull, and then comics and cartoons just blasted into popular culture, and it's cemented forever. And here's the crucial part. This wasn't just bad science, it was politically useful. By creating this idea of a savage, brutish past, 19th-century colonial powers had a perfect excuse for their actions in the present. It helped them argue that primitive peoples needed civilizing, and it created this handy racial hierarchy with, surprise, surprise, themselves at the very top. The caveman wasn't just a caricature, he was a tool. Okay, so we've seen how the myth was built. Now let's start tearing it apart. And we'll begin with the most obvious part, the cave in Caveman. The reality of where our ancestors lived is so much more dynamic and impressive than the myth would have you believe. The story we all know is about humanity huddled in the dark, right? Sheltering in these deep caves. It's the setting for almost every prehistoric movie ever. And it's almost totally wrong. The truth is, our ancestors were masters of living in the open air. The main reason we associate them with caves is something called preservation bias. Basically, things survive for thousands of years really well inside a cave. Outside, not so much. Most people were nomadic, living in sophisticated camps. They built tents from skins and poles, and get this, Neanderthals actually built large shelters by interlocking mammoth bones. That is some next-level engineering. And that idea of sophisticated building just shatters another part of the myth. This notion that life before agriculture was just a messy hand-to-mouth struggle. The old thinking was that without farming, there was no way you could have the organization, the planning, or the long-term vision to build anything big. It should have been impossible.
What does this number mean? Well, that's the age, in years, of Göbekli Tepe. It's a massive, monumental temple complex in Turkey. And the most incredible part? It was built entirely by hunter-gatherers, thousands of years before anyone even thought of agriculture or writing. And Göbekli Tepe wasn't a fluke. We're now finding that this was an age of incredible innovation. You had the Natufian culture building permanent stone houses and brewing beer 13,000 years ago. Over in Serbia, the people of Lepenski Vir engineered what some people call Europe's first city, with architecture designed to work with the climate. These were not simple societies, not by a long shot. This brings us to the social roles we just take for granted. That classic image of man the hunter, right? The aggressive provider, while women passively gathered plants. Well, that's just us projecting our own stereotypes onto the past. The archaeological reality points to a way more fluid division of labor, with really strong evidence showing women were active, essential partners in the hunt.
Okay, now for the most dehumanizing part of the myth, the grunting. Let's look at the actual scientific evidence that proves our ancient relatives could do a whole lot more than just mumble. The case for Neanderthal speech is basically built on three solid pillars. First, their anatomy. They had a hyoid bone that looks just like ours, and that little bone is absolutely crucial for speech. Second, their hearing. Scans of their ear bones show they were tuned to hear the exact same frequencies as modern human speech. And third, their genes. They had the same functional language gene, FOXP2, that we have. So the takeaway here is pretty undeniable. The idea of a grunting caveman isn't just an oversimplification, it's a biological fiction. The evidence from their bodies, their hearing, and their DNA all shows they were fully equipped for complex, articulate speech. So that brings us to the final and most important question. If the science is so clear, why does this myth of the brutish caveman just refuse to die? What purpose does it serve for us today? It really comes down to a choice we make in how we tell the story. By silencing them, by taking away their language and complexity, we turn them into animals. They become fauna, something to be studied from a safe distance, instead of what they actually are, family.
So, if it's so wrong, why do we hang on to it? Well, because the myth is useful. It makes us feel superior, like we're the pinnacle of a long, brutal climb. It makes current social inequalities seem natural or inevitable. And by painting the deep past as this terrifying, awful place, it makes our own society seem safe and advanced by comparison, no matter its flaws.
So we'll end on this thought. The caveman is a powerful story, but it's a story we wrote about ourselves, for ourselves. And if we got this fundamental part of our own human story so completely wrong for so long, it kind of forces you to ask, what other convenient myths about our past are we still living by today?